Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this tutorial, what we are doing is beginning to dive into a tool that we haven't talked about just yet. The tool that we're going to be using is called the Business Modeler IDE or BMIDE tool. This is an administrative tool or application that comes provided with the Teamcenter software to help you make adjustments to the structure of your database. Basically, you're going to be modifying the schema of the object types and rules and different components that make up what you see and interact with inside of both the Active Workspace and Rich Client interfaces. In previous demonstrations, we had went in and talked about what was called the Active Admin workspace that is available in Active Workspace. And you can see there's a lot of different components in here, like the Workflow Designer, Access Manager, and Query Builder applications that rely on the structure of your schema or your database design, if you will, that rely on those components to be able to build rules and queries and workflows to isolate those correct components and do something with them. Without a good understanding of what that BMIDE or Business Modeler IDE tool does, it's going to be very difficult to perform day-to-day administrative activities without understanding that hierarchical knowledge that you need to be able to do that. So in this video, we're going to give you an introduction to the Business Modeler IDE tool. We're going to talk about some use cases and components and capabilities of the tool, create a simple package in the tool, and then potentially deploy it, though that component may be in the next video. So to begin with, Active Workspace, as we've seen in previous videos, is this browser. Deployment Center is our installation tool that we do installations with, and we can install Business Modeler IDE templates using this tool, which we will do later. The Rich Client is a Eclipse-based application that runs locally on a client machine, and here is where the Business Modeler IDE tool comes into play. The Business Modeler IDE tool is an additional application above and beyond the Rich Client, Active Workspace, or Deployment Center. This tool needs to be installed in Deployment Center, or if you're still using the TIM, in the TIM, the Teamcenter Environment Manager. And once it's installed, it gets installed in the base TC root location for wherever you chose to install it. In our case, the Business Modeler IDE tool is in our TC root location under BMIDE Client. And what we're launching is this bmide.bat file. If you're running on Linux, that will be an associated .sh file. So in here, basically, this tool is completely standalone with 95% of its capabilities. So this tool can be installed on an administrative machine that does not have access to Teamcenter, and you can still perform a lot of the tools and mechanisms necessary. Though there are a couple that require you to access Teamcenter and create a connection, like display rules, which allow you to associate a group and role to a type to prevent them from being able to create the type. You can't test out the dynamic compound properties. You can't test out, not dynamic compound properties, but you cannot test out the LOVs, dynamic LOVs that need to query the system to pull that back. And you can't do deployments from the BMIDE to Teamcenter if you do not have that connection. However, everything else you can do. Now, the BMIDE tool, when you launch it, you just double click it here. This tool will open up and ask you for a workspace. So the workspace is essentially a local location that this saves all of its source code to. So like any other Eclipse application, you're building a package or a project. And in this BMIDE installation directory, there is a workspace here that is the default workspace that this tool is going to try and point to. Now, if you want this package to be stored somewhere else, you can simply change it in the pop-up here change it to another directory, and that is where your directory will live. But definitely make sure you remember where that directory is, and we will show you a couple of tips so that you can find it later. You can also choose use this and do not ask again, so it doesn't pop up each time, though I do like a little reminder of where I'm sitting. Now, you can expand recent workspaces and see other places you may have set it, just as a guiding light. But once you have it set, click Launch. Now, what this is going to do is in this folder, it's going to build this metadata folder. And this metadata folder represents kind of the configurations in the client, in the Business Modeler IDE tool. And if you ever get a weird refresh issue or a page isn't opening or you're not finding something, you could always delete this metadata folder and then restart the application, and it'll kind of reset it back to default. If you're doing ITK development or SOA development, though, just note that this is going to wipe your settings out of your tool, anything that you've changed in like preferences or other locations. So this will eventually be where my project gets stored as well, and where I can go get it to do deployments from. I'm going to minimize this for now. The Business Modeler IDE tool, if I open this up, opens up with a standard perspective. And a perspective really is just the layout of the windows. And there's a couple of presets called perspectives. You can switch between the two perspectives up at the top corner, these two green icons that say TC. You can also switch using the Window Open Perspective tab. So if I hover over this one, it says Standard on it, and this is kind of the new standard. It's been around since, I think, Teamcenter 9 or 10. It's really nice. It allows you to filter on types that you want to see. And then you have Advanced, which anybody that's been working on this since Teamcenter 9 or earlier, if you switch to Advanced, it has a breakout of more tabs. Now, if you are using the Advanced tool, we're sorry, we're not going to use that, as we're going to try and stick to the latest perspective available that gives you more options. Just note that in the Advanced tool, the navigator will break out your project components, like what is on the operating system. Classes will represent the database schema or the look and feel of the database. And then business objects will be kind of that abstract implementation object that you see in the client. In the standard, if I switch back over to that, all of which will be in one perspective or one view right here. And as I open them up, you'll see we have a little bit better of a benefit to working in this standard perspective. Feel free to take a look at the Business Modeler IDE Assistant, which gives you nice little help flows on how to do deployments and things. Just note that most of the time we do not deploy directly from the BMIDE tool. It's not seen as good practice. We typically will deploy using the deployment tool called Deployment Center. In the help, though, there is some good information here, a lot deeper information than what you can find on the GTAC site about things like rules, naming rules, conditional elements. So I highly recommend utilizing this help. It has paid off in the past. In the demos, though, to save space and time, I'm going to clean up and close both of those. You can always choose Window, Show View, and then choose Other, and search for them after the fact to pull them back up. So if I come in here and hit Help again, it'll open up the help and context. All right, so there is something a little newer in the 2412 that I've noticed, and it is this Java toolbar up at the top. So the Java toolbar didn't used to show up all the time in the BMIDE. Only our Business Modeler IDE tools would over here. So I am seeing a little bit different kind of look and feel of the toolbar than what I've seen in the past. But I can't really get started or see what's what until I actually dive in and create a project. So most sites will only have one project. Let's just say that. So one project that defines what their system looks like. Now you can have multiple projects. So if you know about the installation components, the base of Teamcenter is called TC Foundation. This is a template. And it contains things like the default item types, item revision types, and basically everything you see if you don't add on components to your Teamcenter installation. Now, the Teamcenter Foundation is kind of the baseline there, and if we want to add kind of adjustments to those settings, additional object types, hide out-of-the-box objects, what we're going to do is basically create a template that then sits on top of that. The template that I'm creating is called the ABC custom template. So I can create a custom template that represents things that I want to alter or add to the foundation. Now, this is really beneficial because then I can install the foundation element and then tweak it to my needs and have my own little package. Now, if I have a supplier or a vendor as well, then they could use my template as a dependent template. So basically their template would be dependent upon my template, and my template is dependent upon the Teamcenter Foundation template. So this could be my supplier, and they utilize my template and then create their own derivatives for their system. So this is kind of when I create a project or a package in here, this is what I'm doing. So I'm creating a space where I can add my own elements to the system and make them work with the required elements that are already deployed. Another example of this would be the foundation, which is always going to be there. And then potentially I have change management. So I can come in here and say, I want to add the CM template, change management template. And what this does is it adds a whole bunch of additional objects. So this one would add things like a PR, an ECR or an engineering change request, an engineering change notice, other types of changes that are also available, assistance requests, etc. So what this does is adds those object types on top of what was there before, and it also makes adjustments to things like their display rules and other elements. So if I go back a little bit here and we take a look, let's go ahead and add our template in and utilize the foundation and change management templates while we do that. Now, your default templates are provided by your installation. So in here, when I'm in the BMIDE folder, there's a templates directory. This templates directory has all of the templates that I've chosen to add to the BMIDE. I don't need to choose them all for my actual project. I only need to choose what I have access to. Now, my tip to you is to add all of the templates for all of the features that you have installed. Because if you add all of the templates to all of the features that you have installed, then you will see all of the options in your project. If you have a use case where a video isn't playing or something along those lines and you're investigating settings in the BMIDE, and that setting comes in with one of these other templates, and you don't have it as a dependent template, then you won't see those options to be able to flag. So what you do is you come into TC Data, which is another directory in the installation, go into Model, and you need all of the ones that say _template on it. So everything in this folder that says _template on it are the features that you have installed. So you just need to make a match. And you can directly match them. So I could come in to my BMIDE templates folder and then just kind of one for one put the templates and dependencies, icons, links. The folder structures are the exact same. Once you have them there, then you can begin to build your project. Now, if you're wondering how do I do this in the installation tool, if you go to Deployment Center and then go into your associated environment, At that point, you can actually come in here and see everything that's installed in the environment. So I can come in and I can see my applications, which are my features. So this is the tab that you're going to want. And then you can see everything that's installed here. Once you get it all installed for the components, the Business Modeler IDE 2-tier option here, you essentially just scroll down and pick which ones you want to add as templates to the BMIDE build. Be careful, if you do the all supported list up at the top, it'll essentially tell you your installed components. So this is all installed components. You can see it's growing versus your installed components. So I just want to make sure all of mine are selected, which they are. So in that case, you can just deploy that out, do the update, but you could also just manually copy them down. Just note that Deployment Center wouldn't know that you did that, so it would be good to do it via Deployment Center. All right, so the dependent templates give us the components that we're going to modify and tweak to the system. The BMIDE tool is an addition and modification tool. I'm going to then come up to the top and create a new template project. There are a couple of options up here, and BMIDE seems the most logical option, but remember this is sitting on top of Eclipse, so there are some standard Eclipse settings in here as well. BMIDE gives us the ability to create like a new composite software project, which is more primarily used for development. We can generate a software package, but you need a project to do this. And then there are ways I can interact with the project. So this is more after you have built it, whereas file new would be how you build it new. If I come in here, I get new Business Modeler IDE Template Project, which sounds great. That's exactly what I want. There are a couple of other types that we'll get into that most customers don't take advantage of. But the primary one to do your work day to day is the new Business Modeler IDE Template Project option. I'm going to click Select, and then it will open up. So before I dive into the different components in this window that we need to fill out, let's take a step back real quick and see the File Import option. So yes, we can create a new template from scratch, and in training, that's great. In a new system, that's awesome. However, in most systems, you already have a template defined. Your administrators have built one up. If it's already enacted, there's almost no system that won't need a little change in the BMIDE at some point. So if you are working through a class and you want to see more representation of your own system, I highly recommend either importing it from your site, which you can configure here, you can connect and actually download it, or asking one of the leads on your team for where that template is so that you can import it. If you do that, just note that you'll come into the Business Modeler IDE option up at the top, and there are basically just a couple of options for a project. So you have import the Business Modeler IDE Template Project, which is kind of like if they take their folder out of their BMIDE, copy it, and paste it into your system, that's what you would choose. However, there is also a package, and this is kind of a zipped up version of that ready for deployment. So if they had hit the BMIDE option and generated a software package, then you would need to provide this. And the way you know is if you go into the folder, go into a folder deeper, if there's a zip file in that folder, then it's probably the package. If it looks more like what you would see up here in the BMIDE window, then it's probably a project. And it will tell you on the next page if you have the wrong one, so no harm, no foul. You can also connect to Teamcenter and import a project from the database. So you just need a connection to the database to do this. So we'll go through imports a little bit later, but for now, let's just go say File, New, BMIDE Template Project. I'm going to choose this. I'll shrink down this display a little bit for you, get it out of my remote desktop window. And then in here, we have a couple of different things. So first of all, the dependents template directory. So that's that directory we were just talking about. If you don't understand those templates, it's going to be very hard to build an accurate BMIDE template project. So that's what that's pointing to, is that same folder where those templates live right here. The prefix is a unique identifier in the database for the things that are in my template. So Foundation's prefix that is provided by Siemens is FND0. Active Workspaces is AWS2. There is other ones like CM, that's a prefix for change management. ARM, which is like requirements management, and so on and so forth. So Siemens has reserved a couple of numbers and a couple of spaces for their own modifications over time. So in our case, I want to do something unique in my prefix window up here. So I'm just going to start writing ABC underscore. So the reason I did that is because I know that this box is intelligent. It's going to tell me a little bit more about what I need. So without having to refer to the help or something, it will say the prefix ABC underscore must contain a digit in character position 2, 3, or 4. So I have to have a number in there. So I'm going to come back in and I'm going to say A3C underscore. So now there's no error with my prefix. So the error is now moved down to my template name. So A3C is going to be my template. It kind of looks like ABC. Now make sure this is not changeable. So make sure that you understand what your template name is and that it could evolve over time. So I always like to put the digit in there because you could say start with an A3C and then want to separate some of your new modifications to a different template. Maybe you are the pilot program in a bigger program and the goal is to take your elements and move some of them over to another environment and overlay it onto there so they can take advantage of it. So I may only want to give them a certain modification point of mine, and that's why I would do that. There's a lot of different use cases for it, but really most companies only have one and other people use that one. So the template name is going to be referred to in a lot of places. So when I'm looking at this folder here, the template name is the part right at the beginning of the file. In this case, Active Workspace BOM. So that is going to represent that component. Or that template name. And that's what I'll see here if I ever use it as a dependent template, and that's what I would see in TC data once it's deployed. So I'm just going to call this A3C training, and that's what the name of my template is going to be. Now, I'm not 100% sure why Siemens keeps this here. There's probably a valid use case. But on the display name, this is what I'm going to see when I go into the BMIDE and or into the application here and go to applications when it's installed. That's what I'm going to see, is the name of that feature. So I want this to be called my AW Toolbox Training Template. And notice if I have a space, it'll yell at me at the top there and say, hey, I can't have a space at the end. So it'll give you a little bit of correction. And then I always put a description. It's required here. Not always is it required in the system, but I always put one because I'm not going to be the only admin to work in this system. And I know how hard it is to identify things later and why they were put into there. Whether or not you have something like Azure tracking use cases, it's still easier to read right when you're here. So I'm going to say this is for awtoolbox.com training on the BMIDE tool. So I'll put that in there. And then in here, dependent templates directory, we just talked about that. Use default location down at the bottom. Notice that it has a location in it. And that's basically where the workspace is. Do I want to use that or not? I could uncheck it and then say save this project to a different workspace or a different location if I wanted to. I like keeping it here. You can always copy it and paste it, but it is really how you source control your data. Enable admin data support. So this is kind of a newer feature in the BMIDE. So basically this allows us to work with administration data. We get into admin data in another course, but it's the ability to report and deploy administrative changes to the system. Now, this is really, really good. It is a way to get your workflow, style sheets, etc. moved over, and Siemens has been evolving this tool since Teamcenter 11's release of the tool. So check out some of our videos on that. We have some in an older version that had some quirks with it, let's call it. But I'm hoping as we get into this in this version, we go down all the different use cases, you'll have a nice stable way to migrate your administrative data. It does only cover about 70% of that data. There are some additional things that you'd have to use other utilities for, but this really, really good support that's added in. So we'll do that in a little while. I'm going to choose next. And then this is out of that templates directory that we've been looking at here. Which of these templates do I have installed in my system is how you should answer this question. Or B, do I want to extend my template off of in the case that I work with multiple customers and I have multiple BMIDEs. So in here, I'm going to basically select a couple of these for the training. So I know that I want to extend Active Workspace. Highly recommend if you have Active Workspace, which you should, to select this by default every single time. It'll give you your indexing settings, all of the Active Workspace specific constants that are in the system. So highly recommend selecting that. And then change management, I have this deployed in my system, so I'm going to pick that just to give me my standard changes. So I know that those are really the only two that I need in my build that I have deployed. Now, if you look at some of these other ones that are in here in my dependent templates, there are extensions on Active Workspace BOM. So if I wanted to extend Active Workspace BOM functionality, I could add that. I could do something along the lines of audit. So if I wanted to change how audit objects work or extend them to my own custom definitions, I could add that. But you really don't know what you don't know unless you can see it. So again, because this is training, we're keeping it light. But in your system, I highly recommend picking all of the ones that you have installed actively. Choose next, and then you select your localizations. We're going to do English in here. We're going to choose next. And then this component is only really needed if you are doing compiled code. So your base path for where the code gets generated, folders that your code would get put into underneath of that path, and then your deprecation policy. But again, if you're not doing compiled coding, you don't need to change any of this. And that's most use cases. You would know if you are doing compiled coding as you're customizing the core nature of Teamcenter. So typically in a generic environment, I just click next. You could always modify this later. Teamcenter Home and Compiler Home, I'm going to leave blank in here, but check out some of our future courses on compiling ITK code, working with workflow handlers and other things. If you are doing that, just populate the TC root so that it can find the different components, DLLs, libraries that you need. And then come put your compiler home in there. Definitely check the recommended compiler on GTEx support or the Siemens Support Center support as it is known today. Usually if you're working with Windows, you're dealing with Microsoft Visual Studio, and you will need Visual Studio do the compiler. Visual Studio Code doesn't quite work. So hit next. And then if you're getting into SOA development, you'll need your SOA kit. You'll need a Rich Client plugin if you're doing Rich Client development, and then some additional bindings. But again, we're just leaving this blank for standard BMIDE work, and then we will choose Finish. All right, so this is going to load the project. Again, it stores it in the directory. So what it does is in the directory that we define, which I just closed, go into Teamcenter 2412, and then in there, TC root, BMIDE, I was in my workspace, 2412, there's my A3 template. This is the same thing, it's just the BMIDE is reading it and showing you an interface to be able to navigate and make the changes. If you knew what you were doing, you could theoretically come in here and in this extensions folder, this is your source code. This is what's going to get dumped into the database to make the changes. So if you knew what you were doing, you could come in here to this default, open with code, and make modifications to this file directly. So we'll give it a second for Visual Studio Code to launch, and then we'll take a look at this file. All right, it is coming up. Let's go ahead and move it over. All right, so this is what the code looks like. Typically, if you're adding things, there's lots of data in here, and we'll show you examples as we go forward in the course. But what you're seeing in here is just basically the template name. If you knew what you were doing, you could modify this directly and you could deploy. But even I don't take a look at that and do that. We'll make little edits if there's big problems, but usually you just use the interface. So in here you have the default, that is your source code, that is called an extension file. Your dependency template, which basically just points to those two that I added. So you've got the AWS2 Active Workspace template, the change management, and the required foundation template. So those three are required here for this to run based on what I had selected. And then the master file here is basically an example of something we can get to later. I can have multiple XML files listed. So these are called templates, template extensions, and basically I could choose to store certain things in one template extension versus another. If I build a new rule, I could have a rules XML that I store all the code for that in. And that makes my template a little bit modular. I could say, hey, I've got 5 people on my team. This person only needs the rules, but he needs the rules that I built. So I can just give him that template, that little XML file, instead of the whole project, and he can import that by himself, and then he'll have it. So we can get pretty tricky with source control and pretty dynamic with it. It does make it pretty hard. I will say, if you don't know what you're really doing, I recommend keeping one. You can always split it out later. There are tools for that. So I'd start with one, and then as we go through this course, we will definitely build out more and show why we might do that and look at it. But just start with one. If you're unsure about it, no harm, no foul. It will deploy the same either way. And then your localization files must match. So what I mean by that is this gets created for each one of the ones that you build if you have more than one. And this will add definitions for object names and descriptions for your different localization packs. So in here, that makes up the extensions folder, which is your source code for what you're doing in the BMIDE. And then the icons would be any icons that you add in the BMIDE, but I will say for Active Workspace, you don't do this. Active Workspace icons are handled somewhere else. So if you are still working in the rich client primarily and you care about custom icons, this is where those would be. If I come back up, settings are settings for the project. Like if I right click on this and change the settings in this interface, that's kind of what it's talking about. So that's what's stored in there. And then if we come back up a little bit more, install is got a couple of cool features. So this we'll go into deeper in another video, but essentially if you're deploying with the TIM still, there is the feature that would be deployed. So it kind of shows you what is going to get deployed. Deployment Center, your application registry, and your app A3C training template configuration and localizations are there. But if I come back up, there's also an update and a default folder. So the update folder says what's being updated, of course. But the install folder allows you to if I open this with code, daisy chain utility calls during the execution of the deployment. So a lot of people don't know about this. It's sitting right here. If you add basic utilities like list underscore users dash u equals infodba dash p equals infodba dash g equals dba, it will actually run this right before the deployment starts, right before the database modification. So I'm just going to keep that there actually in this one so that we can see that as the deployment goes. And then post non-schema add. So this would be like a element that you want to do afterward, maybe a preference import that has to do with your specific object type. So you could say something like generate admin data, or let's do admin data export. So you could do admin data export that exports all your admin data, or an admin data import from another system during the deployment if you didn't use the built-in admin data feature. So there's just a bunch of things you could daisy chain in here, PLM XML imports, etc. So I'm just going to save the list users so we can see that in the log. Minimize this. And then the media, if I open this one up, this one is basically just capturing the information about the project, the description, etc. All right, so coming back out, output will be the folder location that you are going to generate packages to. So you have the option for Linux to support all operating systems, but in this case, it's just got Windows. Packaging is where your packages will get generated when you build those in the BMIDE. Deploy will get populated if you're doing deployments. And then if you're building TCP XML, there are other folders that will get generated if you're using report capabilities, etc. So there may be more. And then the project, basic Eclipse type stuff down here, your properties for your project and your project info. So what this looks like in the BMIDE is if I collapse extensions and go into project files, underneath of this area, this represents the structure of this. You can see project info is right there. The client A3 properties is right here. You've got output right here. We're just kind of playing with the organization of these arrows. But this is an exact representation of that folder set. So you don't have to work in this Explorer window. You can simply come in here and see your default XML, right click and choose open with like a text editor. And they've got different types of editors like XML editors, etc. And you can work with those in here. So Control S does not save changes to this. It's the big gold save button across the top. And then you do have a search as well. But just note that in the next video, since this one has went a little long, we are going to dive into the interface of what this is now that we have a project and can look through what is available. We'll do an overview of the interface and maybe create a very simple object and get it ready and towards doing an actual deployment. Thanks for joining us today.